For coming here today, and it is with great pleasure that I would like to introduce Professor Marcin Piatkowski. Professor Piatkowski is Professor of Economics at Koźmiński University in Warsaw, Poland, which is the highest ranked business school in Central and Eastern Europe, and he is also a lead economist at the World Bank. He's in his job at the World Bank, he supports China and Vietnam in improving their business environment and green development. And previously, he was chief economist and managing director of PKO Bank of Poland, the largest bank in Central and Eastern Europe. He was also formerly an economist at the European Department of the IMF and advisor to the IMF's executive director. He has also served as an advisor to Poland's deputy premier and minister of finance. Between 1996 and 2000, he worked in corporate banking in Poland and in the US, becoming senior manager in Citibank Poland. Professor Piatkowski holds a PhD with habilitation in economics from Koźmiński University and a master's in arts and finance and banking from the Warsaw School of Economics. He was a visiting scholar at Harvard University, the OECD Development Center, and London Business School. Professor Piatkowski has wrote a book called Europe's Growth Champion, Insights from the Economic Rise of Poland, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. It won a national book competition sponsored by the National Bank of Poland for the best book in economic education in 2020, and was awarded the prize of the best book in economics in 2019 by the Polish Academy of Sciences. Please join me in giving Professor Piatkowski a warm welcome to Princeton, and I will hand it over to him.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the kind intro, and thank you for having me. Obviously, a big honor and privilege and pleasure. So I have two jobs. My main day job is a job at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., when I focus on Asia, particularly China and Vietnam. But my other job is teaching at the Koźmiński University in Warsaw, mostly online, but offline wherever I can. But the reason I'm here, and thank you for inviting me, the guys, the Griswold Economic Center for Economic Policy, appreciate to be at Princeton again. I think there was, I don't know if there was anyone here in the audience about 1.5 years ago when I had another talk about Poland's and Central and Eastern European economic success and the lessons learned for more than 100 countries around the world that continue to struggle to come out of poverty and or to become rich. So the major reason I wrote the book was because I felt as an economist, as a Pole, but also a person that actually cares about what happens with the rest of our planet, is that we need to build up the inventory of success stories, success case studies that could potentially inspire all the other countries around the world that continue to be mired in poverty. And as you know, there's 700 million people that still live in extreme poverty, and billions of them that live in countries that are caught in the so-called middle income trap. So what I want to share with you today, within the next half an hour, is a bit of a American Hollywood story of a country that for pretty much all of its history, for 1,000 years, has been economically underdeveloped, not to say backward. There was a couple of steps behind the West throughout all of its history, as the rest of Central and Eastern Europe. But the country that actually has become the largest economic success in Europe over the last 35 years after the transition in '89, but also the largest economic success worldwide among countries at the similar level of income. That has never happened before for Poland. That has never happened before for any other country in Central and Eastern Europe. So I believe that in many ways, this is an unprecedented case of how a country that has been backward economically for centuries suddenly made it. So that's the two key parts of my lecture. And then we'll talk a little bit about the future of what I think might be happening and what needs to be happening for this economic success to continue for Poland and for other countries in the region. This lecture and the book is just not about Poland. It's just a case study that I focus on. I happen to know Poland better than any other country, but really the objective is of inspiring all the other countries I have worked with over the past 25 years of my academic and professional career, of trying to understand what are the kind of things that these countries can learn. And one of the bottom lines is that in many ways, the example of Poland, of this success, I would argue is easier to replicate by developing countries than, for instance, the growth model of the Asian tigers, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and others. And I'll elaborate on it in a second. Let me start by quoting Napoleon, who once said that history is a set of lies everyone agreed upon. What he meant is that all countries, Poland included, tends to idealize their past. We focus on things that we like, what battles in particular that we won, but we tend to ignore things that we do not like. The things that we like are a map like this one, which shows Poland or Europe. It's a map of Europe from 1600s that shows Poland and its supposed golden age, the apogee of its geographical expansion, where it extended from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. And this is what we are being told has been the golden age of Poland, because we are the largest country in Europe. We were in some ways a political and cultural center of the continent. But what we are not being shown, and that's why I quoted Napoleon, is that where you actually chart the level of income over the past 500 years of Poland relative to the economic leaders of Europe, Italy, the Netherlands, and the UK for various periods, and all the data come. I mean, it's not like we had statistics office back in 16th century, but to the best of our knowledge, and there's hundreds of economic historians that spend their lives on trying to put the old numbers together and produce historical series of GDP. To the best of our knowledge, throughout all of the last 500 years until very recently, Poland's level of income per person was not higher, with one little exception, was not higher than half of what it was among the leaders of the European economy. So what I'm trying to underline here is that on the one hand, we are being told it's been a great country extending from one sea to the other sea, but economically, it has already been underdeveloped in 16th century. And then over the following number of centuries, up until pretty much 89, it has been in constant stagnation, even economic decline. And this chart could also be replicated for most of countries in the region, probably with the exception of Czechia, lands that were more industrialized. But on block, pretty much the whole region looked exactly the same way as Poland did over the last 500 years. And the reason, a big part of the book, and I know whoever is online, hello, I did not say hello to everyone, that the thousands that have joined us online. So there's an English book and there's a new Polish edition of the book. I like it because it has a shiny golden cover. So what I spent quite a few pages on explaining why Poland and why other countries today continue to be poor. So what I do, I take Darren Acemoglu and Robinson's and Michael Johnson's research on extractive and inclusive societies. I actually prefer to call oligarchic rather than extractive. The bottom line from their research is that they're saying that societies that have developed extractive political and economic institutions, political monopoly, closed markets, no rule of law, no checks and balances, closed markets, closed borders, no access to education. These type of economies do not develop. And in order for countries to start developing and becoming rich, you need to become inclusive. So the argument that I'm making in the book is that Poland and the region was par excellence an oligarchic society for most of its century. Oligarchic defined as a society that is ruled by a narrow, very narrow elite for the benefit of a very narrow elite. And in fact, Poland and most of the countries, again, in our part of the world, were exactly a textbook example of elites having monopolized political power, which in case of Poland was Szlachta, gentry, and aristocracy, and building institutions, political and economic institutions that would prevent the rest of the society, peasants who were serfs until they were actually liberated by the powers that have partitioned Poland. And they've also done their best to ensure that bourgeoisie or the merchants never had a chance to develop. So they've monopolized the political power, and they've also monopolized the economic power, and it did not end well. I actually argue that this oligarchic society was a major reason why the whole region was not really catching up with the West, at least until 1939. And then I make a controversial argument that in order for countries to move from an extractive or an oligarchic society to an inclusive society, and I think this is where I expand and modify Daron Acemoglu's and Robinson and Johnson's hypotheses, I argue that unfortunately to make the shift from oligarchic to inclusive, you have to go through a period of violence or a credible threat of violence, which is needed to eliminate and or to weaken the incumbent oligarchic feudal elites that will not be eliminated on their own. And in case of Poland, it was the Second World War and communism, and I will not expand on it. We can talk a little bit about it later on. Now, moving forward into 1989, I know you all young people here. Anyone remembers who this guy is? Good to see Harold. Anyone knows who this guy is? Or you also TikToked that you don't get this anymore? Anyway, there was obviously Lech Wałęsa, a big hero of solidarity that was fundamental to engineering the collapse of communism, first in Poland and then in the rest of the region, including the Soviet Union. But I remember these times in '89, mostly because of pictures like these, which is a picture of really what could be my grandma. I still remember, I was 14 years old in 1989, and I actually vividly remember my grandma actually standing in lines in exactly a store like this, conceptually called a meat store, because there was really not much meat over there at all. And over the last 35 years, Poland has moved from pretty much this to what it is today, one of the most developed, commercialized, for better or worse, and rich societies in Europe, and definitely the richest ever. Now, a bit of an evidence of why I make this argument. If you just look at the data on the changes in GDP per person since 1990, adjusting for purchasing power, Poland is by far #1 in Europe. The one question mark, sort of a star that I should put perhaps to the headline, is the case of Ireland. And I just I was actually in Ireland a week ago, talking about, I took part in a seminar that compared the success of Ireland and the success of Poland. The reason I don't put Ireland in this chart, even though Ireland has done better in terms of GDP growth since 1990, is the problem that a lot of GDP growth that has been generated in Ireland has been at least partly based on profit shifting of multinationals. So it sort of undermines the statistics and makes it sort of difficult to tell what was really the growth rate in Ireland. So I omitted it for this particular chart. If we go beyond Europe, outside China, and I put China here because obviously that's been the biggest success story of the last 40 years plus, but the level of income in China is barely half or half plus what it is in Poland. So if you actually only focus on countries that are upper middle income or high income, and if you remove Ireland, which I put here just for you to know, again, among all the other countries in the last 30 years, there was not a single one that would have developed faster, including all the Asian tigers. I'm not sure anyone in the audience, and for sure 99.9% of Poles would not know that Poland has developed faster than South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and every other single richer, more developed economy in the world. That has never happened before since 966, where Poland was baptized. So quite a long time ago. Now, okay, I'm a bit aspirational in the title of this chart. I usually would call it could be, but whatever. Yes. So the point here is, it shows the evolution of GDP per person in Poland relative to some of its peers. The messages that adjusting for the level of prices, which are still lower in Poland than elsewhere, An average Pole now is richer than in Greece, richer than in Portugal, and will probably be as rich as Spain by the end of this decade. And soon after, it can catch up with the UK, Italy, and Japan. There's not a single person, and I've checked because I've talked to them, not a single person among those that worked on Poland in 1989, both foreign experts and Polish experts. There was not a single person that would actually predict this kind of an outcome. If anything, people would put their money on Hungary because it was one of the most liberalized economies in the communist camp, Czechoslovakia or Czechia and Slovakia, Eastern Germany. So it's actually a big surprise that this thing has happened. And we exposed everyone is smart and we believe that it had to happen. But honestly, it did not have to happen at all. Ex ante, there was, again, not a single person that I've met, definitely not a single Pole, unless there was really something wrong with them, who would predict this kind of an evolution of income. Importantly, and I'm here to provoke you, it's not only about Poland, but it's really to make a case here, which is that growth is not only about increasing income, it is also about translating higher income into the quality of life and happiness. I mean, after all, what is the point of having a bigger amount of your bank account if you're unhappy? So Poland actually has done pretty well. And at least if you look at one of the rankings, this one is OECD Better Life Index. It shows that the quality of life in Poland, at least based on these kind of indicators, variables, is actually higher than in South Korea and in Japan, even though these two countries still have a level of income which is 20%, 30% higher than in Poland. So it's kind of interesting because it tells you it's not about maximizing growth. It's about also making sure that you translate this into work-life balance, into well-being, into quality of life, into civic involvement, into low suicide rates, into higher fertility rates, and the like. And I'm going to shock you with this chart. What does this show? I'm not sure you can actually see from a distance. Who has good glasses? Anyone? Poles, for the first time ever, and you can ever tell by looking at their faces, because I think they hardly ever smile, except for these guys now. For the first time in more than 1,000 years, according to the World Happiness Report, Poles are now happier, at least as they self-report in a survey, than the Americans. That's a bit surprising, no? So on the surface, I'm sure Poles will continue to complain. I'm sure I will hear it from you later today when we have a Q&A. But the bottom line is this thing has never happened before. Now, very quickly about the drivers of this success. And I want to talk about both the proximate drivers, the specific policies that led to this success, and then fundamental drivers, which is the drivers that make policymakers want to adopt good economic policies. What I always like to emphasize, and also given my other World Bank job, and by the way, a big disclaimer, I'm speaking today totally on my personal behalf, and it has no, I'm not expressing views of the World Bank or its executive directors. I can send the specific disclaimer later. But seriously, the problem with development worldwide is not the lack of knowledge of what makes countries grow. We have the World Bank, we have Yale economic departments, we have professors like Harold James there. Thank you very much for joining. We have all these smart students, we have Nobel Prize winners, we have hundreds and thousands of people that have good ideas of how to make countries grow. And yet, more than 100 countries around the world are poor or middle income. Why? Why? A bit of interaction here. Why? Yeah, okay. If they even if they try to implement these policies, I think the fundamental problem is, and that's my argument, is that most of these countries do not even try. Because to simplify and exaggerate, they are pretty much caught in this extractive oligarchic societal equilibrium, which makes the elites not want to adopt good policies in the first place. Why? Because if you open up the economy, if you educate people, if you remove barriers to business registration, to competition, to trade, you lose control. There's this bunch of guys that you don't control who can become rich, and at some point in time, they can take away your power. I'm simplifying, but you get the message. So in case of Poland and the region, again, it's not only about Poland. I don't want to be parochial here, just focus on one example, but pretty much it works for all of the others. There were a bunch of reforms that were critical in making the success happen, and there's no time to go through all of these. One bullet point I always like to underline is the privatization thing. Poland was arguably the only economy in the region that, because of a strong civil society, a legacy of Solidarność and the trade union and the fight against communism, that actually prevailed over the policymakers, over the World Bank, over the IMF advice, which said in 1989, privatize, 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 sell it all off, make sure that the commies never come back. Now, Poland did not do this. It actually had a very narrow base mass privatization only in 1995 that covered 400 companies. But the fact that Poland was late to mass privatize, and when it did, we already had a thriving economy, free media. We had a market that could evaluate the value of state-owned, of the asset of state-owned enterprises. So there was very little rent left for corruption and for oligarchs to come up. That has not been the case for all of other countries in the region. The final result is that Poland has no oligarchs today, but also at the same time has one of the lowest perceived level of corruption in the region. Now, so we look at all these specific reforms that most of my work at the World Bank is focused on these proximate reforms. Like, what are the specific plumbing changes, and including execution, to make sure that the economy is going forward? But the questions we're not really asking is why country A or why country B does not even undertake these type of reforms. And I think so. This is perhaps students that study economics here. I would plead with you to actually focus more on these kind of fundamental drivers of development, which is what are the drivers that make society, the elites, adopt the good policies? For Poland, I had the whole list. One of them is actually a positive legacy of communism, the top one. For all the ills and cruelty and economic bankruptcy of the old system, there's one legacy which I argue was crucial to the success of Poland and of the whole region. Because actually the whole of Central and Eastern Europe is going through its economic golden age. It's not only Poland, it's the Czechs, it's the Slovaks, it's the Romanians, and the Bulgarians, every single nation in the region, at least the EU member states. But they all had an inclusive egalitarian society, which was actually a legacy of communism that had eliminated the old elites in the past. So when the societies opened up in '89, got their act together, espoused capitalism, it was the boom that lifted prosperity all across the region. Any questions here before I go into the future? A bit of a magic of what might happen or not. Any quick question, comments? No. All right. So, so the reason I had this revised, updated edition in Poland with a new chapter at the end is that the main message of the book that I wrote in 2017 still holds. Poland continues to be the fastest growing economy in Europe. It has done better than everyone else, pretty much with the exception of Croatia. Post-pandemic, it is now its GDP of Poland after COVID is 10% plus higher than before the pandemic, as opposed to, for instance, Germany, which pretty much has been in stagnation, or Czechia, whose GDP has actually shrank. And most of the Europe has grown, but much less. You know, if I were to quote the IMF, for the next 5 years, the growth of the economy of the Polish economy will be between 3.5. So for an economy, $40,000 of income, that's really nothing to be ashamed of. It's a pretty fast pace. Now, what are the key challenges that I see going forward? Again, a huge list. No time, unless I have a separate course to go point by point. But one of the critical ones is population aging and demographic decline. It is a big issue, not yet, but it's happening with an accelerating pace. So like every year, Poland is already losing about 100,000 people that leave the labor market. It's one of the reasons, not the main reason, but it's one of the reasons why Poland also for the first time in its history has the second lowest level of unemployment among the OECD countries, just after Japan. But they're pretty much the strength of the economy explains the rest. But the point is, Poland will, and the rest of the region is facing an accelerated demographic decline, which at least statically speaking, will shrink its population from about 38 million now to 32 million by 2050. And the gap in the labor market, or the number of people that by which the size of the labor force will decrease, will be 6 million. So Poland will have a 6 million gap in its labor market. Some other things on the key trends, and I want to elaborate on one of them, which is sort of a good news. We living in a historical moment. It's not only because of Putin and because Ukraine and because of Gaza and everything else that is happening. Globally and economically speaking, we have a big moment where there is ongoing restructuring of global value chains and of global streams of foreign direct investment. Globally, FDI, annual FDI inflows are about $1.3 trillion, $1,300 billion. So it's a lot of money that moves locations every year. Now, a big part of this money is not now looking for a new place to invest because of China, because of COVID, because of Putin, and because of climate change. For all of these reasons, global investors, mostly Western investors, Americans, Western Europeans, and others are saying, where do I produce now? The good news for Poland and for the most of the region is that it can become a magnet for these increased inflows of FDI. Not all, actually I work on Vietnam, a country that has been one of the beneficiaries of the change in global value chains. But Vietnam or Mexico, first of all, they're just too small to absorb all of these FDI inflows. We're talking about humongous amounts of money, but also they're just not yet developed enough to absorb the type of investment that requires higher skills, higher quality of institutions, better infrastructure. At the same time, the US and the West is too rich or too expensive for a lot of this FDI to come back and reshore. So my argument is that CEE is in many ways extremely well positioned to be a winner of this global restructuring of capital inflows. Now, what needs to happen for this golden age to continue for Poland and for the region? I call it 5 I's, easy to remember. Institutions, investment, innovation, immigration, inclusiveness or inclusive growth. Institutions, Western institutions. All the countries today that are classified as high income by the World Bank, about 50 of them, if you exclude oil-based economies like Qatar, and if you exclude tax havens, all 50 economies are arguably, they have become rich because of having absorbed Western institutions. Rule of law, democracy, free media, independent and meritocratic public administration, and on and on and on. And that's also the same thing that happened with Japan and South Korea and Taiwan. So my argument and my recommendation to all the governments in the region is, and beyond is, just copy the Western institution as much as you can. Second, investment. It's a big topic. My bottom line here is that all of the countries in the region, in Europe, are severely underinvesting into their future. Poland's spending on public investment is only 4% of its GDP. How much China spends at the same time? Close, 20, but still 5 times more. How much does Germany spend on public investment? Anyone? Germany? No, Germany is Germany. Let me underline this Germany. Germany No, so Poland is four plus, Germany is 2+. And that's been going on for 2 decades more. So I think the big problem with the region and with Europe as a whole is that for various reasons, we have put a blockage on our mindset by saying that we just cannot invest more. As a result, Europe is shrinking relative to the rest of the world at probably one of the fastest historical paces, short of having a war. So unless we changed it and pick up public investment, I think Poland, the region, and Europe as a whole will have even a bigger competitiveness problem, something you can already see in Germany. On innovation, it's partly self-explanatory. I can elaborate later. And inclusiveness. There's economic development does not make sense and is self-defeating in the long term unless you share prosperity. So why I'm one of the probably few or in the minority of economists that actually support social transfers, that support cash transfers, that support, even if these are suboptimal solutions, we need to have ways of sharing prosperity. If we don't, we'll end up with having populists as our leaders, both in the region and here in America, probably in November, hopefully not. And also, we will simply lose a lot of smart people, a lot of Einsteins that will be born in the wrong place to the wrong parents at the wrong time, and they will never have a chance to fully leverage their potential and get to Princeton too. And this is it's incumbent on all the policymakers for political, moral, social reasons to actually make sure that we share prosperity in every way possible. Some of the key lessons learned, and I'm almost done. Institutions, yes. All of the success that has happened in Poland and in the region over the last 35 years would have not have happened without these countries absorbing 500 years of Western civilizational legacy in the run-up to the EU accession. All of these countries just downloaded all of this 90,000 pages of acquis communautaire like an app on a phone. They just downloaded it in a decade, which was critical to the development over the last 30 years. But there's a number of other lessons learned. But the other one is, you don't need to have a dictator to be successful. I'm sure you're aware there's this ongoing debate that says, look at all these countries that have become successful. They had to be dictatorships because otherwise democracy would not make them rich. Now, Poland and the whole region of Central and Eastern Europe disproves this argument. Poland has more than tripled its GDP per person over the last 35 years, while having 20 different governments from left to right through the center. And all of the rest of the region, and has actually not only become economically successful, it's also become socially and politically successful. So let me just conclude. I'm 5 minutes above the limit. I wanted to share with you the story, unprecedented story actually, of a country and a region that has always been economically underdeveloped. And this is one of the reasons why we shudder, we wince when people talk about Eastern Europe. You might have noticed I always use this mouthful, Central and Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, at least in my understanding, stands for the periphery of the European and global economy for centuries. And there were good reasons for it, because we mostly have created political and economic systems, oligarchic systems, that have kept us from growing for centuries. Now it all changed, luckily, after '89. And for the first time in 1,000 years, we are that close to actually catching up with the level of income of Western Europe. The big question mark going forward, and that's one of the questions for the debate we can have, is whether Central and Eastern Europe in the future will become more like Northern Europe, that includes some of the leaders of the European and global economy, or it will look more like Southern Europe with its permanent competitiveness and growth problem. My argument is that the next few years, the next decade, will decide which way the region will go. Will it become more northern, economically speaking, or will it become more southern, like Spain? So Poland will very soon be like Spain, minus a bit of less sunshine, which is not too bad if you ask me, but that's not the point. The question is, how can Poland become the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, or France? And I would argue we have the best chance in 1,000 years in our history to achieve it. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll do Q&A. Yeah, if you could all, like, if you have a question, we can raise your hands and we'll go one by one. Professor, you can.
Yeah, so go ahead, yeah.
Thanks for the talk, Professor. Earlier you were showing the GDP per capita map of Poland, and I was wondering, because right now I know that our Gini coefficient is very low, but I wonder what the historical distribution was, like in the 1500s, whether one part of Poland or like the middle of Poland was significantly wealthier, and how it compared to Western Europe, especially since we did have quite a lot of land, especially on the east.
Inequality in the past was just absolutely horrible. And it was much worse in Poland and in the region and in the West. And in fact, there is historical economic research that shows that in 16th century, Poland and the surrounding countries had virtually the highest possible level of income inequality that would still allow for the poor to physically survive. I mean, you cannot have a Gini of 100, because if one guy takes all the wealth and income, the rest of the society dies. So there's kind of a limit, I think it's around 65, 70 Gini coefficient, where it's required for the rest of the society not to survive. So Poland in 16th, 17th century had a level of income inequality, and obviously even higher wealth inequality, which was significantly worse than even the worst country in the world today. Worse than South Africa, worse than Colombia, worse than everyone else. Why? Because there was this very small sliver of aristocrats, oligarchs, just really a bunch of them, 20 names. Then there was about a few percent from 5 to 8, whatever, that were the gentry, but a lot of them were actually not necessarily rich, but they had legal privileges. But the rest of the society, 80%, lived in extreme poverty of sort of African sub-Saharan type. So they only have enough income to have enough calories to survive. So inequality was significantly high then. Now, you mentioned that the inequality has changed. So one of the things I was wrong about in the original version of the book in 2017, I praised Poland for also having been an inclusive growth champion. What I mean by it is that not only that Poles have become more happy, and now's the time to smile for everyone, even the kind of no joke. So not only that we've become happier now, but that the statistics that I was quoting show that Poland's level of income inequality is now supposedly at the level of Scandinavia. Now I know it's actually not true. The surveys, so the official numbers on income inequality are based on surveys by the statistical offices. They pretty much ask people, how rich you are, what is your income? The problem is that these kind of surveys do not pick up the poor and do not pick up the vast majority of the rich. As a result, the reported inequality is significantly lower than the actual inequality. And there's a bunch of young Polish researchers, Paweł Bukowski, Michał Brzeziński, a couple of others, who have actually used new sources of data, particularly the personal income tax data from the Ministry of Finance, to make the point the real income inequality is significantly higher than what the Eurostat reports. So instead of 28 Gini, it's more like 38 Gini, one of the highest levels among countries in Europe that have adopted the same methodology. So that worries me, because the whole book is about among among other things, about the critical importance of institutions, but also about creating an inclusive society. So if we allow income inequality to get out of hand, that quickly translates into lower levels of social mobility, and before you know it, we'll be an oligarchy society again. Look, I'm simplifying, exaggerating. It's not that simple, and we are not in a feudal society. But some countries like the US and a few other countries are dangerously close to possibly some kind of a threshold where you move back from being inclusive to being oligarchic again. Thank you for the question. Wow, there's more. Sir, since I picked on you, you go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the fantastic speech. I have one comment, one question. When you have before, my observation is also geographical. For equality, I would say in Poland is fantastic. Kind of if you work, if you travel through small cities, Wrocław, Krakow, there has developed as a capital. And I don't know the data, but if we study this geographical inequality, it will be also as small as in Germany, for example, not as another Czech Republic where all the growth is concentrated in Krakow and Brno. Like, it's my just comment from.
Sure. Good point.
Because I travel to work through small Polish cities, and I observed that infrastructure, railway stations, everything is as perfect as in the capital. It surprised me a lot. Just small.
Sure. A good point. Yeah, you should.
Sorry.
Good.
And one question, I'm Russian citizen. So, like you mentioned some problems and some potential points about growth in the future. Like about problem, you mentioned that aging population and you need some immigration. So what happened in Ukraine? You got influx of new, like 5 million approximately, or even more immigrants from Ukraine, very similar in cultural trends and language. So parents help you. One point. Next point. At the same time, you mentioned investments.
Yes.
And what about foreign investments? When you are on the border of this potential war, or
Sure.
at least some talks about potential war with Russia.
Большое спасибо. Очень хорошие вопросы. Да.
And extra small question. Poland is increasing dramatically expenses on weapons.
Yes.
Can it hurt your potential war?
All right. So let me just quickly say, I don't know if those that are listening online heard the question. So it was about virtually regional inequality. The next one was about the Ukrainian refugees and immigration. The third one was about the war and FDI, right? So a couple of points. Now, on regional development, I'm not an expert, but I agree with you. Poland is unusual in that its capital, Warsaw, has much smaller share of GDP than most other countries in Europe and worldwide. And in fact, all the Poznań and Wrocław and Gdańsk and Białystok and even Lublin and now Rzeszów are actually pretty nice places to live. So that's very unusual, and I would like to keep that. On immigration, for the wrong reasons, we got people that we needed anyway. So Poland has absorbed about 1 million of Ukrainian women and kids who have escaped Putin's aggression. And it's actually, in many ways, a humongous success story, because not only did the Poles, and I'm really proud of it, I was mostly in the US, but I was trying to help, but everyone I know among my family and friends were physically actually driving their private cars to the border with Ukraine, picking up complete strangers and taking them home. I mean, that was quite something. And on the day one, as opposed to some other countries, and I won't name them, on day one, all these Ukrainians got the same rights as a Polish citizen, to welfare, to healthcare, to education. They exactly treated like Poles, except they cannot vote. So that's been also pretty amazing and makes me proud. The result is that 2 years plus later, 2/3 of all the adult refugees are employed. And I think, honestly, it's probably one of the historical records worldwide. I just talked to a German friend of mine who said that in Germany, they have about 1.3 million of Ukrainian refugees, but there the employment rate is only 20%. So Poland really got this thing right. Now, Ukrainians, the refugees, will not be enough, and hopefully they will have a reason to go back to their home country soon. But Poland will need them and need 6 times more of them. I just mentioned this 6 million gap that is being built as we speak. So, and there's just not enough Ukrainians, and there's other problems of, Poland not wanting to undermine the development of Ukraine. So we still need to find 5 million or so. I mean, hopefully one way of closing the gap is by increasing the employment rate. Poland has done a lot. It's now above the European average. It used to be way below everyone else. Now most Poles work, but there's still some gap between Poland and Iceland, Germany, or Holland. So perhaps 1.5 million people we can find through increasing the employment rate. Perhaps the hype about AI will finally translate into reality. I'm so frustrated with all the hype. There's just no impact on productivity yet, but inshallah, it will happen. So perhaps 1 million plus of posts in the future will not be needed because of AI. It will actually be helpful, but we'll still need to absorb 3 million people plus. And I have a very specific ideas of how it could happen. We need to import young, smart, intelligent people from around the world, from pretty much any country. Those that do not get enrolled in Princeton, we should steal borrow or cite, I don't know, don't quote me here. Anyway, we should just know who did not get in and invite them to study in Poland for the next 4 years, then give them an automatic permanent residence an automatic residence for a number of years, and actually, and try to absorb them as much as we can. And finally, on FDI and the war. So there were concerns about Poland being a country that borders with Ukraine, which is at war, that it would undermine foreign direct investment. The opposite has happened. So the global forces of the restructuring of global value chains are much more powerful than the increased risks. And the result is that post-pandemic, FDI inflows into Poland relative to GDP have doubled. So we have proven in the pudding. The money is coming in. I would argue that the region can double these inflows again, as long as it can make a case to the US, to the rest of the West, by saying, look, you will not beat China in competitiveness. You're just too expensive, and China is too competitive. Why don't you come to Rzeszów, or Wrocław, or Poznań, all really nice, pleasant places to live, as you notice yourself. Come in, we'll give you the really well educated workforce. We'll give you legal certainty. We're not gonna put in you and take your money away when something happens. We are a safe place for you to invest for the next 200 years. So I would expect all of these countries in the region to actually start making the case, saying that it's not only in our benefit, it's in the benefit of the West as a whole. If we want to be competitive for the next 50 years, we have to find new places where we can locate production and stay competitive. Thank you. Spasiba.
What do you think about the relation between rule of law and economic growth? So, for example, if rule of law wasn't so weakened during the last 10 years, let's say, would Polish growth be possibly bigger, or does it not impact it at all?
Good question. So the question is about the rule of law, the weakening of the rule of law and the economic growth. Very good question. And I get this asked a lot because, again, the book is about the foundational nature of institutions to long-term development. Now, I should say it's complicated, but the bottom line is that the government in power until last October, you can criticize them for a lot of things, and I did it myself, being anti-European, being rhetorically anti-immigration, although in practice they were very pro-immigration. In all kinds of ways, I think they weakened Poland's position in Europe and worldwide. But economically speaking, they've done well. So you know, one of the reasons why the book is still selling well, is a bestseller back in Poland, is because the story still holds. Of the past 8 years, Poland's economies have continued to grow. And interestingly enough, there's a bunch of papers, particularly one that I like, on that creates a treatment group, which is the populist Poland, and a control group of countries that were not populist in the region. And it compares its performance between 2015 to 2019. What is the conclusion? You would expect populist Poland to have underperformed. And in fact, it has overperformed the control group by 8%. My point is, the rule of law was a problem. The credibility of the Supreme Court has been weakened. The credibility of many of other legislative and judicial institutions have been weakened. But fortunately, it has not translated into practical economic growth. And I think the big challenge for the new government is to rebuild trust in the institutions as quickly as possible. And hopefully that will work. Yes, you and then yes.
Thank you for that. So, you mentioned that one of the primary causes for growth for Poland was late privatization. And how do we actually do it now, where some countries are over the period of transition and there's a still oligarchical structure? And how do we do it as kind of like a foreign institutions like World Bank or European Union or even countries that want to give influence?
So the question is about how to deal with oligarchs now, and how to sort of privatize how to fix the situation where the eggs were already broken. Yeah. So you have scrambled eggs, or you don't have eggs anymore. That's kind of difficult. It's like what Wałęsa said, you know, that what Poland was trying to do is how was it, this aquarium? I will come back to me, a metaphor about fish and aquarium. It will come back in a second. But yes, we're trying what, say again?
Make an aquarium out of
yes, so what Poland was trying to do is make an aquarium out of a fish soup. Thank you, Harry. Yeah, exactly. So here's about how to unscramble the scrambled eggs to make them into eggs again. That's not easy, and I'm not sure I have a straight answer, but you just have to keep on trying. We have to have a clear conscience, like the global institutions can work on governance. Privatization has, for better or worse, gotten a bad name globally, also because of Central and Eastern Europe, because of Russia, because of Ukraine, because of Czechia. So that's bad for these countries. That's good for the countries that can learn from this experience. Like I think the idea of mass privatizations has pretty much died because of the Czechs, because of the Ukrainians, because of Bulgarians, because of the Russians, and it's good riddance. IMF and the World Bank and the global experts were wrong. You don't want to mass privatize pretty much ever. You don't get economic benefit, you get long-term political damage that is almost unworkable. So I don't know how you put oligarchs back into a bottle. I don't know how to do it, except for actually doing your best, you know, trying to make sure that the rule of law works. I mean, like Romania, it's a country that had fundamental problems with corruption. And to my knowledge, that have made substantial progress in cleaning up the system. I think being part of the EU helped. Being the fact that Romania has had to prove to the European Commission that in order for Romania to get EU funds, they had to ensure the EU that the money will be spent well. So that created a powerful incentive for the elites in Romania to clean up the system. So that's very specific EU example. But the point is, you know, smarter people than me on this topic, but there are certain ways. In principle, it's possible to make it happen. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned pretty broad inequality in income, higher than Eurostat reports. I think the previous government had some social transfers that didn't really work, for example, in terms of the birth rate and so on. What would be your solutions to that kind of a problem?
I like these cash transfers. So we know the polls in the audience know it as 500 plus. A lot of people criticized it, particularly the rich Varsovians, my friends, in fact, every single one of them. But I disagree with them because the issue with the transition is that we cannot find ideal solutions. The ideal solutions of addressing poverty and inequality have failed over the past up until 2016. Why they have failed? Because first of all, they ostracize the poor, because when you make support programs non-universal, you immediately saying there is something wrong with you if you need the state support. And in fact, the reason that all of these transfers were not introduced earlier is because the elites were saying that it's wasted money for all the poor people that are lazy and do not want to work. My argument is that this child cash transfer is economically suboptimal, but politically as good as it gets. Only a universal support program could have worked, because any other one would not be adopted by the elites, or it would be shut down later on. Now, on this particular 500 plus, it did not, indeed, it failed to increase the fertility rate. Perhaps it's just we fighting a losing battle. Fertility rate is going down in every single developed country. Even if you have the best solutions that exist, family policies, tax credits, child transfers, maternity leave, whatever have you, fertility rates continue to decline everywhere. South Korea, it is a successful economy, the most successful next to China and Poland over the last 30, 50 years. But the fertility rate in Korea now is 0.72, and in Seoul, it's 0.5. These are the lowest ratios in the history of humankind, 300,000 years. My point is, it's not about growth. It's not about high incomes. There's all other things that matter. On the child transfer, to conclude, I like this because it was a suboptimal but yet useful way of sharing prosperity. So Poland has increased its incomes by almost 3 times per person over the last 35 years. But some people, lucky fools like me, increased incomes by 30 times, while many others by only 1/3. And these guys whose incomes are increased by 1/3 are not really happy with the transition and are voting for populists. And I think it's all in our common interests to actually make sure that they feel that they do benefit from the transition, even though they've chosen an occupation that is not really Goldman Sachs. Yes, question there.
Another related to what you were just saying. So I understand that there are these there's this ongoing debate about the consequences of the economic condition and who reformers and economists really should fear in terms of sources of obstacles to continued economic reform. On one hand, you have arguments that we are to do quick transition because otherwise society will coalesce and stop it. On the other hand, you have arguments that say if you do transition, then the people who immediately win will consolidate their gains and prevent the society from pushing. Do you sympathize with either side of this debate, or do you perhaps do different?
I'm trying to, I want to make sure I understood your question, but I guess what I can say and what I've argued in the book is what made the region different than any time earlier in its past is this positive legacy of communism that bulldozed all the oligarchic feudal structures. So in '89, Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, in principle, we are all equal or as egalitarian as it can get. Today, if you look at the list of the richest Poles, these are all guys that came, quote unquote, out of nowhere in '89. They were not aristocrats, they were not gentry, they were not sons and daughters of some rich person. They had nothing to do with Taylor Swift. They were just guys with some good ideas, with hard work attitude, with a bit of luck, that made all the money. Now, and I think there are probably some threshold effects. So when you ask me, how do you move from sort of the oligarch, how do you make sure that those that win do not recreate a system that blocks others from growing? And I think the threshold effect is such that if your inclusive society is inclusive enough, I mean, you just have enough mass of people that support new system, then it's extremely hard for narrow elites to sort of fight the rest of the society. And Poland is actually a good example. There were elites, and still are, that argue that, you know, that we should cut taxes, we should reduce social transfers, but the rest of the society in a democratic system disagrees. And a proportional voting system, I mean, these are things I'm not an expert in, so, you know, I'm just brainstorming with you. But particularly with a proportional voting system, every vote counts, unlike in the US, by the way, right? So you have all parties that you can vote for, and your preferences are reflected in the result of the elections. So I think it also has helped the region, minus the privatization part, to actually remain inclusive. And even if you adjust for these new ways of measuring inequality, the region as a whole is pretty European and much less unequal than other parts of the world. Thank you. Yes.
To what degree is the growth in Central and Eastern Europe backstopped by the European Union, both from the perspective of rule of law and also investment? And is there any good controls that you're aware of that you could use to compare?
To compare?
To compare to non-European Union?
Yeah. So, okay, couple of things. One, there's a bunch of analysis, treatment and control group analysis, that looked at the impact of the EU accession. And in a few days from now, we'll be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the EU enlargement. So for instance, for the papers I know for Poland, they say that without the EU, Poland's level of income would be 40% lower. For Lithuania, would be like 50% lower. I mean, these are just models. I would actually argue that there would be probably even lower than what they have included in the models, because what these models do not, I think, consider is the fact that once you join the EU, the EU puts on you an economic policy straitjacket, like in an asylum, for good or bad. What it means is that your scope for maneuver is much more narrow than elsewhere, but also your scope for strategic policy and mistakes is also much more narrow. So let me give you an example. If you are a minister of finance in Poland, the things that you could do are very limited, because you immediately, if you sort of increase deficit, you immediately get a phone call from Brussels and they say, we are just about, which will actually happen in Poland, we're just about to impose an excessive deficit procedure on you, and now you will have to explain every single expenditure going forward. Now, imagine you are a Brazilian Minister of Finance. No one calls you. If you happen to be a populist, if your president is a populist from some other country down south from Brazil, you just keep on spending, and there's nothing to stop you. So I think there are in many ways, the EU has helped this success. EU funds, that's about 0.5 percentage point of growth per year, but it's the institutions, it's the new ways of doing things, but it's also the straitjacket. Why countries are ultimately successful? It's not about growing at the Chinese rate for 10 years. It's about growing at the Danish rate, 2% per year, for 100 years. So this sort of EU straitjacket perhaps in some way restricts your room of maneuver and for growth, but it fundamentally reduces the risk of making the mistakes that will undermine your whole success story, which I think is the case for most other countries outside of the EU, unfortunately. Right? They grow for a decade or two, and then some populist comes in and boom, it's all gone.
Thank you again for speaking here today. I have a question on a topic I'm not too familiar on that I saw recently in headlines. I was wondering if you had anything to comment about the political and legal situation surrounding the chief of the Polish Central Bank and
Well, it's a very specific question. Here we go.
About the potential of like long-term consequences and risks to the credibility of central banking as an independent institution.
Wow, that's a very good question now. But okay, now on the head current president of the National Bank of Poland, I'm not a lawyer and I cannot comment on the legal case, but economically speaking, I don't think there's much of a case against him. I think that he's been more or less doing his job. We can criticize him, and rightly so, for doing this, doing that. I particularly was irritated, hurt, and frustrated by the unexplained cut in interest rates just before elections. But these other arguments about like the central bank buying government debt, that's just not I don't find it convincing at all. We actually have central banks exactly for the reason that we need them when we have a crisis. Central banks, like in the US, where the Fed has printed trillions of dollars and no one is accusing it of breaking some laws, because they did this because of the financial crisis in 2008. They did this because of COVID. Poland just did the same, except that, a couple of $1 billion instead of $1 trillion is here. So economically speaking, I'm not convinced, except for this September-October rate cut, which I think weakened the credibility of the central bank. And I think they should have not done this. On the independence of the central bank, I'm nuanced. I'm trying not to be overly orthodox, because I look at the European Central Bank. Obviously, there's also a debate about whether Poland should adopt the euro or not. My bottom line is, let's adopt the euro, but not yet. I like to say, let's get engaged, but not get married, if you want another metaphor. And one of the reasons is that European Central Bank, as of today, again, quote unquote, is just a bunch of orthodox monetarists that are undermining the European economy. I think that ECB has been way too restrictive, actually has made policy mistakes, which have made the crisis in the Eurozone post-COVID much deeper than otherwise. So before we launch forward into central bank independence, we always have to remember that at the end of the day, a lot of these institutions are just a bunch of orthodox, self-flagellating monetarists who just care about killing inflation no matter what. And I think that's not the point. The point is kill inflation without killing the economy, and that's where it gets complicated. Thank you. Ladies now. Questions from the ladies, please. Yes, ma'am.
The reduction in population pointed to lower birth rate, but was immigration also a significant factor?
Yes and no. Yes, because indeed after 2004, about 2 million plus of Poles have left. And no, because net immigration has become, I think it's already 6 or 7 years that most Poles are coming back than leaving. Plus, we have, over the past few years, we have suddenly become a country of immigrants. Not only that we have 1 million Ukrainians, we have probably 300 or 400,000 Belarusians, and we have like 600,000 other people. I have not met yet a single Uber driver in Warsaw that will be Polish. Not kidding you. Last time it was 3 Uzbeks and 1 Georgian and 1 Pakistani, which I think is great. So it's been an amazingly quick transition. And again, I'm proud of Poland. There has been not a single social trouble yet, despite the country that has virtually been 100% homogeneous, having absorbed 2 million people. Now, why did the Poles emigrate in 2004? First of all, I think it was inevitable that they had to emigrate, because the level of the difference, the gap in the level of income was just so high that even if you were the Kościuszko patriot, you would just have to leave. I mean, you could take a Ryanair flight from Warsaw for $10, move to London, and triple your income. So even if you read Pantadeusz and Mickiewicz every day, it's kind of a no-brainer to take the flight. And also, actually, monetary policy, unfortunately, supported this immigration because we've been too orthodox and too independent central bank in like 2000. which at that time, the Central Bank of Poland has increased interest rate to 20%, which has killed off the economy. In 2004, just when Poland entered the EU, Poland's unemployment rate was 20%. So we pretty much, not only did these Poles wanted to leave, we also gave him a big kick, talking about monetary policy. So that was kind of unusual. But I think a lot of these Poles eventually may actually come back. And one of the ways I would want to fill the gap in the labor market going forward is I would actually try to provide incentives for Polish diaspora to come back. For instance, there's apparently about 20 million foreigners that live around the world that are of a Polish descent, including, like, for instance, 800,000 of them in Brazil. Why not go to Brazil? You know, they have now an income level which is half of what is in Poland, and it's not necessarily safe. And okay, the football is so much better, but minus football, you know, if I were a young Brazilian with a Polish name, I would be interested in moving, except that they do not know that Poland would be open to absorb a lot of these people. So I'm actually trying to influence the government into opening it up to a lot of these young people that just have not heard this lecture today. They have not heard about Polish economic success. They do not understand that the quality of life in Poland is now the highest ever in absolute terms and in relative terms, and that the labor market is like waiting for them. One practical piece of evidence, last one. I've talked to the CEOs of companies that are involved in business BPO, like business services. You know, they service accounting of Goldman Sachs in London, New York, whatever. So they already employ 400,000 people in Poland, but they said that the single one problem that they're facing is lack of brains and skills and people to work for them. They could employ 1 million people by the end of the decade. So, you know, why not get a bunch of nice Brazilians with Polish names, 600,000 of them, and move them to Krakow, and big part of the problem solved. Simplifying and exaggerating, but you get my point. All right, one or two last questions, please. The second from you.
I'll be the wolf in the room. Poland and China, CE and China more broadly, how do you envision the economic relationship develop in the future?
In bright colors.
The investment of China in Poland is like 0.%, like all the VI we're getting, if I'm not wrong. So how we can develop that, and can our economies actually be complementary, and what can we offer to China or others?
I will be a bit restricted in what I can say, but the bottom line is there's just not enough Chinese investment in Central and Eastern Europe. The whole initiative of 16+1, 17+1 is pretty much, how shall I put it, has not exactly met the expectations. And there's very little investment outside of Serbia and Hungary. And it's difficult to imagine, particularly given the geopolitical tensions, that it will change anytime soon. If you ask me how to be pragmatic about China going forward, given that it will be at least, or it will be close or equal in size to the US for decades to come. It doesn't matter if it's going to be number one, number two, but it will be as large as the US going forward. It will be two huge economies for the rest of our lives. It will be America and China of a comparable size. So you cannot ignore China. And so far, it's been largely, so China has a huge trade surplus with Central and Eastern Europe, and now increasingly with Europe, and even more with the US, as you all know. So the question is, yes, what is it that Central and Eastern Europe can do? One of my solutions would be to find, for instance, to set up joint ventures between Chinese companies and Polish companies in Poland, Chinese style, to make sure that they can actually enter the EU market, but that these new companies will also have a way of increasing export to China. But let me stop here. We can talk more later. Last question, if there is one. Anyone? Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much.